Good morning, and welcome to the Boulder Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. I'm Pete Wernick, and I'm joined today by our guest presenters, Paula Palmer, Chris Itano, and Marianne Lawler, with Ted Koryeth, Jess Huderman, Chelsea Sardoni, Marayo Akande, and Calvin Standing Bear providing music, and our tech ushers, Mary Stackpole and Deborah Mensch, who help things run very smoothly here on Zoom. Our senior minister, Reverend Lydia Ferrante Roseberry, is on a well-deserved ministerial sabbatical through August 9th. And I'm so glad to have you with us here today. You are the reason we do this. I invite you to shift into gallery mode and scroll through the screen so you can see who else is here. Without you all, there would be no us. You are all welcome here today in all the beauty of languages, cultures, skin tones, shapes, and sizes that come together in your uniqueness. You are welcome here today. In all the ways you experience and express gender, you are welcome here. In the beauty of whom you love and how you love, you are welcome here. In all the ways you make your living, the places you're from, you are welcome here. Christian, pagan, humanist, Jew, Buddhist, mystic, Muslim, indigenous religions, Unitarian Universalist, with all the traditions that inform your spiritual life, you are welcome here today. No matter how long you've been away, nor how soon you will return, you are welcome here. Whether you come with laughter in your heart or tears, you are welcome here. You are invited to join us with an open mind, an open heart, and willing hands. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe in 7 excellent principles, the first of which is in the inherent worth and dignity of all people. We acknowledge that our community is located on the lands once stewarded by the Arapaho, Ute, Lakota, and Cheyenne people. Our congregation honors Indigenous legacy and respects the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands through our connection with Right Relationship Boulder, which you'll hear a lot more about today. We also acknowledge that Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, also known as BIPOC, and Latinx and Hispanic people, have been and continue to be devalued, violated, and even killed due to systemic racism. We commit ourselves to becoming anti-racist as individuals and in our institutions by acting to dismantle racism in society, taking guidance from and honoring the lived experience of BIPOC people, and developing personal relationships between cultures. A good anniversary to celebrate coming up is known as Juneteenth, commemorating the day, June 19th, in 1865, when enslaved people throughout the South were informed of the Emancipation Proclamation that had been made over a year before, but not until then did they know that they were free at last from slavery. So there is a celebration in Longmont next Saturday, and we'll have information about it in announcements to follow the service. But that is an important day in our United States history, and it's coming right up. If you're new here, we're glad you found us and hope that even in this virtual community, the Zoomitarian Zoomiversalists, you can experience the warmth and love of this congregation. Please use the chat window now to say hello. Each Sunday is different here, so to get better acquainted, we hope you come back a few times. To get better connected, please see the chat window for the link to our first-time visitors page, the fellowship calendar on our website, good to remember this, BVUUF.org, and our Connections Weekly. Or just email your information to our office manager, Carol, at officemanager@bvuuf.org. That address will be in the chat window as well. Right after the service, we'll invite you to stay for special announcements, discussions with our service presenters or our virtual coffee hour. More announcements at the very end of the service. And now it's time to light our chalice. If you have a chalice at home, you can light it with me as I light our fellowship chalice. So we know where you are. Please write in the chat, chalice lit in the name of your town. And please say our chalice lighting words along with me. Let me get my view going better here. Okay. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, the light of truth, and the energy of action. And now I'll sing our bowl again. Inviting it to draw you deeper into the present moment and this, our beloved community. And now I'd like to introduce today's service and welcome our guest presenter. As we members of this fellowship here every Sunday, we are mindful of our lives and our fellowship being centered on land that only 165 years ago was populated by indigenous people, buffalo, and much wildlife, and scarcely any white people. This service will address much of what we feel about the way history has turned out. Paula Palmer is a sociologist, writer, and award-winning activist. As executive director of the nonprofit organization Global Response, she was involved in 70 international campaigns to help indigenous people in local communities to defend their rights and prevent environmental destruction in their community. She is one of the founders of Right Relationship Boulder. Welcome, Paula. And please introduce the slide presentation we're all about to see and our narrators.
Thank you, Pete. And good morning, friends. I'm here today with two other members of Right Relationship Boulder, who are also members of this congregation, Chris Yoshinaga Itano and Mary Ann Lawler. Chris and Mary Ann have both worked for racial justice in their careers. Chris served as Vice Provost and Associate Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Equity at CU. Mary Ann did decolonization work in Wisconsin and collaborated with the Menominee tribe there. Chris and Mary Ann are going to narrate our slide presentation. First, I need to share my screen, so give me a second to do that. We'll begin with this quotation, which serves to frame our program. Where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. Where community is to be formed, common memory must be created. This is a statement by George's Erasmus, Dene Nation, co-chair of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples in Canada. So Chris and Mary Ann.
So we're speaking today about Fort Chambers. This is a call for Boulder to reckon with our history and build right relationships with Indigenous peoples today. Across our country, people are re-examining our history and the way we have failed to fully and accurately memorialize our collective past. Whose stories, voices, and images have been erased or denigrated? Whose stories have been sanitized and mythologized? In our public spaces, how can we reckon with the terrible injustices and legacies of slavery, genocide, colonization, and racism? How can we bring all our peoples and their histories together with a common commitment to truth, respect, and justice?
The Boulder Valley has been home to Indigenous peoples for more than 14,000 years. They have hunted, traded, held ceremonies, raised families, lived and died here. People of many indigenous nations live here today. Their stories are embedded in the land. Those of us who live here today have much to learn from their centuries of experience and knowledge. It is time for our indigenous peoples to share theirs now. In 2018, the City of Boulder's Open Space and Mountain Parks Department purchased a 110-acre property on 63rd Street between the Valmont and J roads. This land lies between Valmont Butte and Haystack Mountain, sacred sites to many indigenous nations. The new open space property has special, painful significance for the Arapaho and Cheyenne peoples. Their stories need to be heard and honored at this site.
The 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie recognized the Front Range as the territory of the Arapaho and Cheyenne peoples. The Boulder Valley was rich in elk, deer, antelope, chokecherries, and other valuable plants. It was the winter camp of Chief Nawat, known locally as Niwot or Left Hand, and his band of Southern Arapaho. In November 1858, Nawat permitted some gold seekers to shelter over the winter in a few rough cabins that they put up at the mouth of Boulder Canyon, with the condition that they would leave in the spring. But on January 16, 1859, the miners found gold, and 3 weeks later, they established the Boulder City Town Company in clear violation of the Fort Laramie Treaty and their agreement with Chief Nawat. As Boulder grew into a boom town, the Arapaho moved their camp north and then east out onto the plains to avoid conflict. Although Boulder Valley settlers were never directly threatened by native attacks, they built a sod fort, Fort Chambers, to protect themselves. In 1864, a volunteer militia mustered and trained at Fort Chambers and then joined Colonel John Chivington's U.S. military forces to carry out the Sand Creek Massacre. More than 230 Arapaho and Cheyenne people, including Chief Nawat, were murdered.
The site of Fort Chambers, just north of Valmont Butte, is now City of Boulder open space land. And we are faced with important questions. How will Boulder tell the story of this land? Whose voices will be heard? How can this land become a place to reckon honestly with Boulder's history and bring Native and non-Native people together to remember, to reconcile, and to build positive relationships today? Right Relationship Boulder is a local organization that is raising these questions, and we hope you will join us. The city's open space department is starting to develop a management plan for the Fort Chambers site. So now is the time for local residents and organizations to make our collected voices heard. Our first task is to learn an important chapter in our community's history through the lens of the Fort Chambers site and ask ourselves what this history means for us today.
So let's step back in time to the late 1850s, just before the Civil War, when Arapaho lodges dotted the land between what is now called Valmont Butte to the south and Haystack Mountain to the north. This was the winter camp of the Southern Arapaho Peace Chief Nawat. Nawat was a well-known indigenous leader who consistently tried to reduce the potential for conflict between his people and the white settlers. Early in his life, he learned to speak fluent English and traveled as far east as Missouri to see what the western expansion of white settlement would mean for the Arapaho. Nawat's unwavering advocacy of nonviolence was a deliberate strategy for the survival of his people. As settlers repeatedly violated the terms of the 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie, Nawat worked to calm the outrage of his young warriors. Even when minor settlers gang raped his own wife, daughter, sister, and other Arapaho women while their men were away hunting, Nawat refused to retaliate with violence. His reliance on the settlers' rule of law, however, proved to be in vain.
As civil war broke out in the East, hostilities, raids, and attacks between settlers and indigenous warriors escalated in the West. In the summer of 1864, Colorado's territorial governor, John Evans, issued a frantic call for volunteer Indian fighters. To avoid conflict, the Arapaho and Cheyenne peace chiefs had been moving their people away from white settlements along the Front Range. In the summer of 1864, to show his peaceful intentions, Chief Nawat put his people under the protection of Fort Lyon on the eastern plains. But game was so scarce on that dry scrubland, and the fort offered them no provisions, so they were forced to move on. They joined their Cheyenne allies, who were camped to the east along the Smoky Hill River. There, in early September, Nawat and other Arapaho and Cheyenne chiefs parleyed for peace with the military commander in charge of Fort Lyon, Major Edward Wynkoop.
Lacking authority to negotiate a treaty on his own, Wynkoop accompanied a delegation of 7 Cheyenne and Arapaho chiefs to Camp Weld, outside of Denver. They hoped to secure a peace agreement with Governor Evans and the commander of the Colorado Military District, Colonel John Chivington. Evans, however, was already preparing for war, and he refused the chiefs' entreaties. But he told them their people would be safe if they would return to Fort Lyon and place themselves under the protection of Major Wynkoop there. By October, Chief Little Raven had moved most of the southern Arapaho to the south, away from the fort. But Nawat and his family of 50 or 60 people, accompanied about 600 Cheyenne and their chiefs to Fort Lyon. Unexpectedly, on November 5th, Major Wynkoop was relieved of his command at Fort Lyon and sent off to Kansas. Major John Anthony took charge of Fort Lyon and moved the Arapaho and Cheyenne to Sand Creek, about 40 miles away. He declared them to be prisoners of war.
Meanwhile, in the Boulder Valley, white settlement was booming on land that was still Arapaho and Cheyenne territory, according to the 1851 treaty. In 1863, settlers had built a sod stockade on the homestead of George W. Chambers, fearing Indian attacks, but no such attacks took place. The next year, when Governor Evans issued his call for volunteer Indian fighters, Boulder Valley men mustered and began military drills at Fort Chambers. They were designated as Company D of the 3rd Colorado Volunteer Cavalry Regiment, under the command of David Nichols, who resigned his position as Boulder County Sheriff to accept a captain's commission. In late summer of 1864, the 111 men of Company D began training for war. In her biography of Chief Left Hand, Boulder author Margaret Cole writes about the men who formed Company D. She notes that many of them knew Chief Nawat and other Arapaho people personally. They had traded, negotiated, and coexisted in the Boulder Valley. It had been only 6 years since gold was found in the Boulder foothills, when the Indian fighters of Company D rode out to join Colonel Chivington's forces in their march toward Fort Lyon and Sand Creek.
In the chill dawn of November 29, 1864, the Boulder Valley men were among the 700 U.S. cavalrymen who attacked the Cheyenne and Arapaho people who were camped at Sand Creek under the protection of the U.S. flag and a white flag of truce. For their first assault, Company D singled out Chief Nawat's Arapaho encampment. Most of the 60 or so Arapaho people in the camp were killed, although a few survived. Chief Nawat was mortally wounded and died a few days later. 8 Cheyenne chiefs were killed.
Soldiers galloped through the camps, rifles blazing, and they chased women and children for miles up the dry creek bed and across the plains. They brutally murdered and mutilated the bodies of more than 230 Cheyenne and Arapaho people. Returning victoriously to Denver and Boulder, the soldiers displayed Native people's body parts as trophies while crowds cheered. Captain Silas Soule and Lieutenant Joseph Kramer, who refused Colonel Chivington's orders to attack the peace camp at Sand Creek, became whistleblowers and sent an honest report to Washington. The details were so grotesque that even in the midst of the Civil War, Congress held hearings and determined that Sand Creek was a foul and dastardly massacre. However, neither these hearings nor an Army investigation resulted in the prosecution of Colonel Chivington or the soldiers under his command.
Of Sand Creek, the Native American Rights Fund attorney Walter Echo Hawk wrote, "The land can speak to those who listen. There is a bluff overlooking Sand Creek where you can hear women and children crying in the wind."
So why is it that most people in Boulder have never heard of Fort Chambers and our community's connection to the Sand Creek Massacre? History is written by the conquerors. The men of Company D and other perpetrators of the Sand Creek Massacre went on to become some of the state's most honored citizens. John Evans was pressured to resign as governor, but he became a railroad tycoon once the threat of Indian attacks on the trains had been quelled. He also founded the University of Denver, and Mount Evans is named in his honor. David Nichols, commander of Company D at Fort Chambers, was elected lieutenant governor after he established the University of Colorado at Boulder with money from Clinton Tyler, a militiaman from Black Hawk, who moved to Boulder after Sand Creek. Tyler made his fortune cutting trees into railroad ties and built the first road up Boulder Canyon. David H. Moffett of Moffett Tunnel fame was in the 3rd Regiment and became a prominent banker and railroad man. Major Scott Anthony, the Fort Lyon commander, established a land title company and became a wealthy real estate developer.
And after Sand Creek, what became of the Arapaho and Cheyenne? The so-called Indian Wars raged on the plains for the next 25 years, taking an enormous toll in death, misery, and loss. By the late 1870s, most of the Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho were living in poverty on reservation lands in Oklahoma. The Northern Cheyenne, unaccustomed to the hot, dry conditions there, broke away and were eventually assigned a reservation of their own in Montana. The Northern Arapaho were resettled on a reservation in Wyoming that they were forced to share with their traditional enemies, the Eastern Shoshone. Over the decades, the Arapaho and Cheyenne tribes have worked hard to build economic stability, provide opportunities for their youth, and maintain their cultural and spiritual practices.
But Boulder is still the homeland of these indigenous peoples. Northern Arapahoe Business Council member Stephen Fasthorse told us, the Boulder area was the chosen place for the Arapahoe people in a spiritual sense. Our ancestors had a spiritual quest to search for a certain place, and when they came here, they knew they had found it. It was foretold to us by the higher being of life. The Creator has always led our people. Our hearts always yearn for our original homeland. We hope we will be welcomed in this place that we belong to.
Boulder has benefited directly from Indian removal policies that violated human rights, broke government treaties, and forced Arapahoe people from their homeland.
Those words are part of the Indigenous Peoples Day resolution that Boulder City Council unanimously approved in August 2016. The resolution creates an annual Indigenous Peoples Day observance, and it resolves
that those now living on these ancestral lands recognize that harm was done and acknowledge that we have a shared responsibility to forge a path forward to address the past and continuing harm to the Indigenous people and the land.
the resolution continues.
City Council directs its city manager to work with city departments, Native Americans, and historians to correct the omissions of the Native American presence in public places, resources, and cultural programming.
To help the city implement this resolution, a group of Boulder Valley residents formed Right Relationship Boulder. Our first action in 2017 was to visit the Arapahoe people in Oklahoma and Wyoming. We told Arapahoe leaders about the city's resolution, and we asked them how they would like to relate today with the land of the Boulder Valley and the people who live here now. They told us they would like to have land in Boulder where they can honor their ancestors, teach their children about their history, renew their relationships with the ecology of their homeland, and hold ceremonies and cultural events. They would like to have housing in Boulder where they can stay overnight on their frequent trips between Oklahoma and Wyoming, and also for Arapahoe students studying at CU. And they would like to teach the people of Boulder about Arapahoe history, culture, arts, dances, governance, and the issues they face in their communities today.
Since our first visits with the Arapahoe, we have hosted them here for Indigenous Peoples Day events and for a series of meetings with city, county, and school district officials. When the city purchased the Fort Chambers site in 2018, we took Arapahoe leaders to see the property. Their eyes scanned the beautiful land where their ancestors had lived and where soldiers had prepared to attack them, and they fell into solemn silence. Slowly, the Southern Arapahoe chief Eldrin Kendrick sang a memorial song and blessed all the people who had lived and died on this land, all of us, his Arapahoe ancestors and the Boulder men of Company D, and those of us who live here now.
In January 2021, the city's Open Space and Mountain Parks Department began developing a management plan for the 110-acre Fort Chambers site. There may be different and competing views about how this land and its historic buildings should be protected and utilized. Already, the city has granted an agricultural lease for a portion of the land. To put this in perspective, the city of Boulder owns 46,000 acres of open space land. Of these, roughly 16,000 acres are leased for farming. The county owns another 66,000 acres of open space land. and 24,000 acres are in agricultural leases. The Fort Chambers site is only 110 acres. Right Relationship Boulder is urging the city to recognize the uniqueness of this property and its historical, cultural, and spiritual value to the Arapaho and Cheyenne peoples. We are asking the city to follow the direction of Indigenous leaders throughout the planning process that is already underway. We hope our city and Indigenous people together will be able to transform a site of racist violence into a place of remembrance, learning, dialogue, and reparations. We hope Fort Chambers will become a place where we can practice right relationship.
If you would like to join us in this effort, here are some things you can do.
Learn the history of Indigenous peoples in Colorado. One excellent source is Margaret Cole's biography, Chief Left Hand. Visit the Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site.
Invite Right Relationship Boulder to give this slide presentation for your church, school, or organization.
Write letters to the editor of the Daily Camera, to City Council, and to the Director of Open Space and Mountain Parks. Advocate for Arapaho and Cheyenne people to guide the development of the Fort Chambers site.
Follow Right Relationship Boulder on Facebook. To receive e-newsletters or to join a working group, write to rightrelationshipboulder@gmail.com.
Participate in a Toward Right Relationship with Native Peoples workshop. Contact info is on the screen.
This concludes our slide presentation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share this program with you. We'd be happy to take questions in the breakout room after the service.
Each week, we remind ourselves of the abundance of our lives and this community by donating half of our plate to organizations that share our values. Today, we will share our plate with people of the sacred land, Indigenous people with many different tribal affiliations who live in the Boulder Valley have formed this organization whose mission is to support American Indian people to preserve their culture, language, and ways of life that were intimately tied to the land. One of their members, Rick Williams, wrote, "Just like the wolves who are being returned to Colorado, we too would like to be able to be welcomed in our own land. Our first call to action is to get a law rescinded that calls for Colorado citizens to kill hostile Indians and take their property. Our second immediate call to action is to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to study the conspiracy, genocide, and fraudulent conveyance of Indian land in Colorado via the actions of the Fort Wise Treaty of 1861. This initiative is led by descendants of the people who were violently removed from the area. We appreciate your support in helping us achieve our goals." We, of course, encourage you to donate generously, and we invite you to write in the chat what steps have you taken or will you take toward right relationship with Indigenous people. for the work of this fellowship, bringing love, reason, and compassion and justice to this world and to the people of the sacred land, we dedicate our offerings.
And now
We're
sing. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
Please sing along with this recording of Gathered Here, hymn number 389.
Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, spirits draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in the mystery of the body, scattered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in the mystery of the body, scattered here in the struggles and the body, scattered here in the struggle and the power, scattered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in the mystery of the body, scattered here in the struggles and the body, scattered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit, draw near.
There. And now I invite us into our time of community connection, our time of sacred sharing. If you'd like to share a joy or a concern, please write it into the chat window by sending a chat to everyone, and then I will read out loud what you send. If you would like us to be able to follow up with you, please include your full name when you write. When you share, please include where you live and briefly let us know what is in your heart today. I'll put a stone into our sacred waters on your behalf.
So for the pastoral prayer and blessing, we remember the graduations, being able to visit relatives, being outside, for gratitude for outgoing elected leaders, and being able to meet in person. And we remember the concerns of medical issues and surgery and healing thoughts, and hope for coverage for medical treatments. We remember the people who once called the Boulder Valley their home. We remember their culture, their language, their history, and their people. And we remember broken promises that resulted in the founding of the city of Boulder and the role that Boulder played in the massacre at Sand Creek.
We have a final video to present, one that I have found very interesting to watch. This was the first Boulder Indigenous Peoples Day that started happening yearly in 2018. This is an annual event presented by Right Relationship Boulder. So we will watch this and be near the end of this service. Thank you.
looking forward to what's Indigenous Peoples Day going to look like? What do we want it to look like, and how do we make sure it's not just a day? That we are building a foundation for a relationship going forward. We started with the interfaith service, and after that we had the lunch that was served by Tokabe, and I think that was a wonderful icebreaker. Everybody eating and together and in the same room. And then we had the grand entry with all of the tribal folks and the dignitaries. And then we had these wonderful, wonderful educational speeches.
We must create a new future together, something which is long overdue. Well, no one knows where this path will lead. We are committed to this journey with you.
This is resolution number 1190, and it is a resolution declaring the second Monday of each year to be Indigenous Peoples Day.
Despite the broken treaties and promises and the acts of genocide and exploitation and discrimination that have come before your people and that you have experienced, you still come to us and extend a hand of friendship and kindness.
And if you don't know the answers, you wait for your friends to say, hey, Brian, this is what we need, this is what we want, and you're patient.
It's just so amazing to learn what Boulder is doing in establishing Indigenous Peoples Day.
I do want to assure you that the Boulder Valley School District is committed to ensuring that we tell an accurate story about the traditions, the culture, the current issues that are faced by the Arapaho, and the history.
From here, I want to move to our Arapaho guest speakers. So, Mr. Seahair.
Because here in this area, where our ancestors left their moccasin prints on the earth, it's like a stamp.
We have Hetahinanaina. It means we were here since the beginning of time.
So today marks a historic day for us. It's something I'm so proud to be a part of, because now we are home. And we will continue to come back home time and time again.
I'm very grateful on this day that is being recognized by the Boulder County and all the people of this valley to make those changes necessary to recognize Indigenous Day.
You people in Boulder, you're setting that standard. I'm going to go home and tell everybody. I'm going to tell all those politicians that are coming to us wanting our vote. You need to follow the lead of these Colorado people.
Land that is being proposed to be set aside for the Arapaho people when they travel from the north to the south, or when from the south to the north.
So I just thank you guys for having that understanding and wanting to get to know us. I think that it's going to help you guys so you can continue to educate your future, your children, as to who we are.
That was, of course, followed by the exhibition dancing, which, of course, is always fun, and you've got everybody dancing. They get so excited when they talk about the hand games. So when we were talking to them, well, what kind of a setup do we need for the hand games? Do we need chairs? The language, I didn't go in where Teresa Chase was doing the language program, but I understand that she had so many people in there, and it was sort of hard to break up for the next thing because they were all into it.
So we're going to say, Nana Hawa Nisitya. Nisitya. Nana Hawa Nisitya.
The youth gave the gifts to the Arapaho elders, and that was just a lovely gesture to tie the generations together, and also the Native youth from Boulder with the Native people from Northern and Southern Arapaho.
So the American Indian Youth Leadership Institute has been in Boulder for over 18 years.
The Q&A we did at the end was kind of based off of the success of a Q&A we did in June. To me, that's really where defenses melted away.
My point of view is I will be thankful and I will be grateful for whatever the land is given to their outposts for this function.
I'm blown away by two things: the generosity of the Arapaho people and the generosity of our volunteers. We probably had 50 people with little name tags on them. So, pretty amazing.
I truly hope that everyone in our congregation will consider attending the next Boulder Indigenous Peoples Day. I believe it's the second Monday in October. And having attended one of those events, I can tell you how very moving it is to me. I've lived in my house here that includes Left Hand Creek on our land, named after Chief Niwot. And I've lived here for over 40 years. If you multiply 40 years by 4, that brings us back to the time that the chief was alive here with his people, and the buffalo were here, and it's not that many years ago. And I often think of what it would be like to just be cleared out here and told you could live in Oklahoma or Wyoming, even though you had complete rights to the land by treaty. So this is an injustice that we hope can be addressed in a meaningful way and welcome these people back to where their homeland is. It means so much to them. And now, let us all extinguish our chalices. Following this, we'll have a benediction and announcements. Please do stick around for those. You can say these words with me. Let us extinguish the chalice. We extinguish the chalice, but not the warmth of love, the light of truth, nor the energy of action. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again.
Let us resolve to form right relationship with the Indigenous people who called Boulder home and work towards reparations so that they can teach their children how they once lived in a place that we now call home. I want to end with a Ute prayer, Earth Teach Me. Earth, teach me quiet as the grasses are still in the new light. Earth, teach me suffering as old stones suffer with memory. Earth, teach me humility as blossoms are humble with beginning. Earth, teach me caring as mothers nurture their young. Earth, teach me courage as the tree that stands alone. Earth, teach me limitation as the ant that crawls on the ground. Earth, teach me freedom as the eagle that soars in the sky. Earth, teach me acceptance as the leaves that dry each fall. Earth, teach me renewal as the seed that rises in the spring. Earth, teach me to forget myself as melted snow forgets its life. Earth, teach me to remember kindness as dry fields weep with rain. Go in peace.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Marianne. Thanks to our tech ushers, and thank you all for being present with us for our service. As promised, here are announcements about upcoming events and today's breakout rooms. Members of our opening, that is the opening of the building, task force will be in a breakout room after the service today to share some information and answer your questions about the process of beginning to hold some events in person at the fellowship. We don't have an abundance of answers yet, but we would like to share with you what we do know and what the process looks like so you are more in the loop. Helping and connecting with one another. That's what neighborhood connectors do. And our team could use you next year. It's an opportunity to meet and help fellow members, especially in your neighborhood. We organize meals, help with errands, have monthly coffees on Zoom or in person, have a monthly e-newsletter, send welcome emails to visitors, and have new members and welcome emails to visitors and new members, and sometimes for personal concerns expressed in the service. We call folks who cannot get out much or who need extra contact. And on occasion, we may even throw a fun neighborhood party. For more information, email Tanya Accurso, and her email is in the chat. As mentioned earlier, Juneteenth will be celebrated here in Longmont or nearby in Longmont this coming Saturday, June 19th, from 12:30 to 6 p.m. at Willow Farm in Longmont. Food will be available to buy, $15 for adults, $8 for youth. You can bring your own non-alcoholic drinks, but no glass containers. It's a zero waste event. And again, Juneteenth is the anniversary of the informing of slaves throughout the South that they were now emancipated. A very important date in history. Please RSVP to Pat Davis, whose contact information is going into the chat now. Another announcement about LOOP, L-U-U-P, Loop Grows, Digging Deeper. Also on June 19th at 1 p.m., Reverend Emily Conger will be joined by Kelly Lodice, a UU Wiccan, who will help us celebrate the abundance of summer solstice in an event called Loop Grows, Digging Deeper. For details, see the email going into the chat now.